The Father willed to give us birth by the word of truth, that we may be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Alleluia. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus proposed a parable to the crowds. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that a person took and sowed in a field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, yet when full grown, it is the largest of plants. It becomes a large bush, and the birds of the sky come and dwell in its branches. He spoke to them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed with 3 measures of wheat flour until the full batch was leavened. All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables. He spoke to them only in parables to fulfill what had been said to the prophets. I will open my mouth in parables. I will announce what has laid hidden from the foundation of the world. The Gospel of the Lord. I want to recount a little bit. We left off last Wednesday of our reading of the book of Exodus in chapter 16, which is where we heard about the miracles of the manna. There were other miracles that took place as well in those few chapters in Exodus. And then at chapter 19, the Israelites arrived at Mount Horeb, otherwise known as Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are the same place in the Old Testament. And they arrived at Mount Sinai how many days after the Passover? 50 days after the Passover. Thereby, from that point on, to recount their arrival at Mount Sinai, the Jews have celebrated the Feast of Pentecost, which they still celebrate today, 50 days after Passover, and which, of course, we as Christians have carried over as well. They arrived at Mount Sinai, and God revealed a number of laws to Moses at the foot of Mount Sinai over the course of 5 chapters. And then in chapter 24, there is an epic scene of Moses and Joshua and 3 other men ascending Mount Sinai along with the 70 elders of Israel. And at the top of Mount Sinai, they beheld God's face, and they had a banquet with God. The foreshadowing, in many ways, of what will happen to each of us in heaven one day. But also at the base of that mountain, there was a very particular ceremony that took place. God revealed his laws to the people, and Moses, to ratify the covenant, the relationship with his people, they sacrificed animals, and Moses, you might recall, he took blood and he sprinkled it upon the altar, and then he also sprinkled blood upon the people. And he said, "This is the blood of the covenant." It was kind of the high point of salvation history up until that point. God had liberated his people from Egypt. He had brought them to Mount Sinai to worship him, and he made a covenant with them, making them his chosen people, a holy nation, a nation of kings and priests. And it's kind of the high point of salvation history up until that point. But unfortunately, as we read today, the people grew weary as Moses stayed on the mountain, receiving more of God's laws for the people. And they grew impatient, and they made a golden calf. You ever wondered why they made a golden calf? Scripture scholars argue that the reason why they made a calf is because one of the gods in Egypt was the god Apis. And so it was in the form of a calf. So in other words, the Israelites, they didn't want to be children of Yahweh anymore. They wanted to go back to their old gods, their old religion in Egypt, what they were more comfortable with and more familiar with. This is the great tragedy in the book of Exodus. Many people say that just as the fall of Adam and Eve was to mankind, so the fall of the golden calf was to the nation of Israel. It set them back a great deal. And in fact, it's because of this golden calf that the Israelites had to receive a second law from God, which we call the book of Deuteronomy, literally meaning the second law. And the second law, in many ways, was not nearly as good as the original law they received at Mount Sinai. Another thing that happened at this breach at the golden calf is that the priesthood was no longer available to all of the tribes of Israel, the firstborn sons, but it became narrow and only allowed for the Levitical priests to be priests. It was reduced to one tribe. These are just some of the things to point out about what we've been missing over the last few days, and we'll continue commenting on this tomorrow.